Hi, I'm Erika Lockhart, and I just got off work, sitting down here with a cocktail, doing something I've been thinking about doing for a long time, and that's making a video about what I think. Who cares what I think? Well, we'll see. I read and watch a lot of videos on YouTube and various channels that I like, and I'm finding that there are certain things that are getting left out of the discussion or not being addressed in a manner that I think appeals to people. I mean, I watch Ben Shapiro, for example, and this guy is like really smart, and I think he goes way over some people's heads. And often when I listen to various podcasts and so forth, I find the ideas appealing, but I also find that there are things that don't get covered that I think belong in the conversation. Anyway, so who am I? I'm just a girl born in the Midwest in the 1950s, late 1950s. I'm almost 60 now, and I was raised in Ohio. I moved to California and lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for about 35 years. Now I live in Utah. So I have a little bit of perspective, I think, to offer on the difference between the coastal communities and the inland communities and what's going on in the culture. That seems to be the big thing now, is the culture drives the politics. So, American, born in the late 50s, white, unmarried, childless. I earned an AS degree when I was 50 in an online school after I'd already retired, and I kind of did it for my dad. My dad always wanted me to finish school, and I had a hard time with it when I was younger. That's part of this because I want to talk about maturity and immaturity. One of the things that divides us is definitely age. So this AS degree I got qualified me for jobs that would earn me like a quarter to 1/3 of what I was making when I retired. So that's one point. I don't want to get this all too muddled, but there's been a lot of talk recently about whether college is necessary. And I think that there's a lot of other attributes of you as a person or me as a person that are necessary to be successful in America today. I've always thought of myself as a pretty ordinary person. My parents always encouraged me to think that I could do whatever I wanted to, and some roadblocks poked up along the way, and I just moved to the side and went around them and came to something that was better. I think that's great. I've had a really wonderful life. I really think I'm an ordinary person, but a lot of people tell me that they think that I was really brave, or some of the things that I did recreationally, like go cross country on an 8,600-mile trip around the United States on a motorcycle and camped on my own. People were just like amazed. How could you do something like that? Weren't you scared? I mean, it was kind of weird that every town that I went to, I'd get this refrain. It was the same every time, and I probably could have repeated it or talked along with the person as they said it. You're traveling alone? You're a woman? Do you have a gun? Yes, I'm traveling alone as a woman, and I had a gun, or I did not have a gun, and I never really had any problems. Go figure. Anyway, people today seem like really afraid, and so that I was not afraid, that's a big thing. I just did what I wanted to do. My life was an adventure. I know Ben Shapiro talks about this, how life in the United States is an adventure, and I have had a roller coaster ride compared to a lot of people that I know. Just met an old classmate at Easter dinner at my mom's, and it was funny because, well, I had a graduating class of like 450 people, and this woman was saying that she remembered me, but I didn't remember her. We never did anything together that I recall, but people remember me. And I've gone back to school, and all these people remember me. And I felt like I was invisible at that time. But I was just going along and doing what I wanted to do. And I've had a wonderful life. I've had a life that would stack up, probably in the middle, probably pretty middling, because a lot of people have had adventures in their life. I'm not the only one. Anyway, I wanted to talk about what divides us in kind of more simple terms than some of the political pundits and stuff say. And just starting out, I have a list here. One is age. Okay, I'm almost 60 years old. So I've been going through this long life and looking back and thinking that when I was young, I was really like anti-authoritarian. I was privileged. I felt privileged. That was within myself. It wasn't that I was like granted it. I granted it to myself. I granted it to myself because I was smart in school and I did really well with little effort. I was lucky. My parents were both like really bright. They both graduated from college, and then they had this girl, me, who does not want to even continue in college. Goes a couple of semesters, drops out, works in a diner, blah blah blah. Maybe not what they were expecting. I think they wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. And actually, I did apply to be in a medical school program. But anyway, that's another story. I don't want to get too far off track. But anyway, age. My dad had like 3 lives. My mom and I agree, and probably some other people, that he started out poor, living in West Virginia and Southern Ohio with a mother who was working to support 7 children. And he was the youngest. He was raised by his brothers and sisters while his mother was at work, and they survived. And he was the youngest. My mother was the youngest. They were the youngest children. I was the oldest, so maybe they didn't quite get me. I might have been a little bit strange to them. But anyway, my dad had the life where he was growing up, and then he went into the military. So that was like the first part of his life. Then he met my mom, and then he had the second part of his life, which was family. Strangely, he decided kind of arbitrarily that his family life was going to go from the time that he married until the time that his kids left home. And then he was determined to divorce, and that he did. He left to go to the third portion of his life, where he learned to live on his own. I mean, the guy couldn't even make a roast beef sandwich. My mother would go into the hospital, and she'd put a bunch of stuff in the freezer to cook for him. And I could make some sandwiches for him, and I'd say, "Dad, what do you want on your sandwich?" And he's like, "Oh, whatever your mother puts on it." I mean, I had no clue. I was just a little girl. So I'd make him those sandwiches. But when he went on to the next phase of his life, he got all excited at first. He was like, "Oh, I can make chicken, I can make potatoes." So he was like cooking all this stuff. And then, as a single person, it's hard to do the cooking alone at home thing, even if you don't know how to cook much. And that kind of went by the way. So it's like more eating out and stuff. But he got to be a much more gentle and caring person. My poor father, he died while making a graduation card for a friend's son. He just like toppled over in his chair at the computer while he was making this card. It was really, really, really tragic. But during that third portion of his life, he was full of generosity. He was full of life and happiness. It was just wonderful. Anyway, so 3 sections of life: youth, and then work, and then being by yourself. More stories about that probably in the future. Anyway, so another thing that divides us is by location. On my recent trip to my mother's to go to Easter dinner at her friend's house, I became aware of one of the things that I'm really appreciative of. I was brought up in Ohio. Ohio is a great place. When I first moved to California, I met so many people from Ohio, and everybody used to say, Ohio is a good place to have been from. And it's because I think that our upbringing there was moderate. it was just lovely. I grew up in a university town, and my parents were Democrats. Um, my father ran for office. My grandfather ran for office. I think he may have been mayor for a time. My mother worked for the city. She was the clerk of the city council. We're all wrapped up in government, but there wasn't like the acrimony like there is today. I mean, people might have had personal opinions about people representing the other side, but they didn't. There was no real deep down animus in it. It was just disagreement, and they had discussion. I remember going as a school child to one of the city council meetings where my mother was being the clerk of the council and writing down all the notes, and they had nothing to discuss. In the 30 seconds, the whole meeting was over. It was just kind of amazing. Well, people like to argue. Anyway, so I was lucky to grow up in Ohio. I thought it was a moderate state. You got exposed to a lot of different ideas. We didn't have like a lot of racial diversity. We did have some black people. It was basically black people and white people back then. There wasn't a lot. Although now there are a lot more Asians and maybe some more Hispanics, but mostly Asian. And that state has like grown up a little bit into the current world. It's kind of interesting. I went into a Chinese restaurant near my dad's when he was still alive, and I walked in and I said something about how I was visiting my dad from San Francisco, and they went in the back and they cooked up everything fresh instead of scooping it out of a bin. So that was pretty nice. I guess I got a little bit of favoritism there from Chinese people, even though I'm a white person. I don't know if that would happen now. Anyway, so location also tends to deal with like what kind of jobs are available. So when I was growing up, there were a lot of industrial jobs available in Ohio, and especially down around like Pittsburgh and Youngstown. They had steel industry, and I'm not going to like really comment on this except to say the fact that steel industry moved out of that area, and it left a lot of people in bad shape. And my ex-boyfriend's family was down there, so yeah, not so good of a period of time for those people. So changes happen. And as soon as I was old enough, as soon as I could totally flip the dependence on the family, I was out of there. Joined the army, blah, 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 blah. But the types of jobs that were there, I mean, my dad was an accountant, and I kind of dreamed that I was going to grow up into his shoes. So I went to Cleveland, and I worked at Arthur Anderson and Company for a time as a data entry clerk, and this and that and the other. So that's how I got started in life. Restaurants, all the kind of jobs that people get when they're really young, and you don't know much, but you learn a lot. It's so totally amazing how much I learned, and that set the direction in which I would go, which was away from that. So, family income and wealth. I grew up in a fairly rich community. I wouldn't maybe say rich, but it was like maybe upper middle class community. They had a lot of money for schools. The schools were really good, and I did really well. And it was a university town, so I got to work in conjunction with some of the university professors to do advanced school work, so that when I got out of school, I had a graduating GPA of over 4-point average, and that's like pretty amazing to me. And I worked hard, and I loved school. But when I left school, I was kind of over with it. I kept trying to go to college. I even had a scholarship, which I kind of blew off, which has actually turned out good for me. But I got a degree, an AS degree in applied science of criminal justice at the age of 50. And I kind of did it for my dad because he always wanted me to go to school. Yeah, like I said, both my parents were high school graduates. My mother's side of the family, her mother was a high school graduate, college graduate, but her husband was not. But he was really great at what he did. Anyway, so family income, we were like pretty strictly middle class, but we were also pretty strict, and I was always jealous of all the girls who had the pretty clothes and the pretty shoes and da da da. But what I got from my family was my dad was a gadget freak, so I had computer skills and stuff beyond what people had at that age, from the age of 16. So a lot of our family wealth was plowed into his buying first off gadgets. He got first off gadgets. He got the first time like the HP calculator came out. I forget what they call the calculator, but it did like tangent, cosine, blah blah blah, all this stuff. He had like the first one, and it probably cost like $500. And then several years later they were $100, and then now you can probably get one for $20. Anyway, he was a first adopter. And that helped me a lot, because as we moved in, I was born in the 1950s. As we went into the 1970s, everybody starts being trained with that stuff. So actually, the fact that my dad had the money to buy those things, it was an advantage to me. I'm not going to say anything about that. It's just how it was. The other thing is religion or lack thereof. My parents outsourced my religious training to my grandparents. My grandparents took me to Sunday school at a Methodist church, and I don't know what it was in my mind. I just looked at that and I said, what is this? We go to Sunday school and they have us pay coloring books of pictures of men wearing dresses. I mean, I was so literal. That was all I got out of that. I never got the God thing. It took me a while to develop that. And but I don't see that there was a big difference in town. I mean, when I was growing up, it was in the 70s, when I was like a teenager. And that was when they started doing this thing where churches were coming together and saying, oh, so it's basically kind of like conservative or reformed Jews, where they're just like taking what they want and leaving out what they don't want. But basic fact of the matter is, I was brought up as a pretty conservative person in a religious environment, and I learned what I know now. So religion now divides people so much, and I'm not going to go into that right now. I can get into that later. But one of the things that I appreciated about religion was it taught me gratefulness and thankfulness. It wasn't until I got a little bit older. See, age here, we're going back to age. Age divides us. Age divides us because it's the times that we were brought up in, and it's also a kind of a continuum over time of like when people become mature. And even when I was in my early 30s, looking back, I don't think I was very mature. I think that I'd made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of bad decisions. Had I started saving money when I was early instead of blowing it all on albums and eating out and cars and what have you, that I would be in a lot better shape today, but I didn't do it. And no one was getting taught things then about finances, and they aren't now. So that's a continuing weakness, and it's also a continuing it's a continuum that's continuing to make older people less mature. So if I was immature at the age of 30, and I'm sure that some people younger than me were much more mature, I was not there. It took me until I was in my 30s, and I finally decided to 34, oh my God, I am going to have to like save for retirement, work really hard. I think it's pretty typical. I think your ages from 30s through 50s are probably your most productive years. And I worked my way up a ladder in a job and stuck with the same employer for 16 years, and it really did a lot for me. But now I'm thinking that people are being coddled until they're older. I wasn't coddled. I left home at the age of 16. I mean, I worked hard and I spent all the money, but I didn't have a program for life. But I did love being young. When I was young, when I was like 16, 17 after I left home. I could work in a restaurant job, and I didn't get paid that much. I had a job that got paid $1 an hour plus tips. And I lived on campus for a summer in a house where nobody paid any rent. So we lived pretty cheap. We had some fun and didn't worry about the future too much. So that was good. I mean, you could, back then too, the economy was such that if you wanted to quit your job at the Dairy Queen and go on vacation for 2 weeks, you would go on vacation for 2 weeks. You'd go back to the Dairy Queen and see if they still needed help. If they liked you, they'd hire you back, or you'd get another job. I think I switched over to working at a truck stop as a waitress, then as a cook. That mobility and that portability was like amazing. Still, I can't see people these days having those kind of circumstances where you could live in a house for free and work for $1 an hour. I don't know. So another thing dividing us is health, and that's one of the big things that's happening in the country now about the health insurance industry. So I've been really lucky to have good health, but when I was 18, I had to have knee surgery, and I didn't have any insurance. So it took me years to pay it back. Kind of got me in the habit of working 2 jobs, which I've done most of my life. So it was a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, now looking at the medical system, I'm thinking I would rather pay cash and pay a lower rate. I had a doctor in San Francisco or in Berkeley where I could go to the doctor and pay $125 for up to an hour of consultation. Or they would bill my insurance company and I would get a bill for $314. What in the heck is that? The world is just crazy. Anyway, that's just kind of an introduction to me and some of the things that I think are issues that I may have comments about. And I hope that you like this. Maybe you have some comments. I welcome comments. I would love to have people tell me like what they think is like wrong with what I'm saying, or have they observed that in their time, or from younger people, if you think that you're, more or less or as much responsible as people when we were younger, or do you see a plan ahead to have a wonderful and fulfilling life? Anything that you want to talk to me about, I can talk about. I mean, I have a bunch of topics that I can talk about, and obviously I am a person who could talk and talk and talk. So anyway, this is the Erika Lockhart Show. I wish you good night and good fortune, and I'll see you next week.